Hello and welcome to Red Red. Today I have a kind of different video planned. A lot of the time when we're reading books, we go through and we maybe spot that the book has an epigraph that's just a short sentence or paragraph kind of setting up the mood of the book. And a lot of the time I see them and I kind of have no idea where they come from, or I've never heard of the book before, but I'll just read the epigraph, kind of take it on its own terms, and I'll just think, oh, that's pretty interesting, and then move on to reading the rest of the book. But sometimes, we come across an epigraph that is a book that we've already read, or it's a book that we maybe own and we've been meaning to get around to, but we haven't quite gotten around to reading it yet. So what I thought would be A, tedious, but hopefully B, overall very fun and worthwhile, was to just go through every book that I own and find all of the epigraphs and see how they rank or how they plot in terms of these categories. So I came up with 5 categories for thinking about the epigraphs. A is I own the book and I've read the book. B is I own the book but I haven't read it. C is I don't own the book but I have heard of the book. D is I haven't heard of the book but I've heard of the author. And E is it's completely brand new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially just grab all the books that I own that have epigraphs. I'll go through. I won't read the epigraph because that is going to make this video take so much time. But I'm just going to say where the epigraph comes from and whether or not I own and have read it. So I've got them. Now there are some books that have more epigraphs than others, and I've kind of saved them for the end. These first couple are just going to have maybe 1 or 2 epigraphs. So starting off with Flowers for Algernon, we've got an epigraph at the start that is a long paragraph, which is why I don't want to read it, but it is from Plato's Republic, which I do own. I'm gonna say that this goes into the B category because maybe 4 or 5 years ago I read half of this, so I'm not going to count this as having been read, but I do own it. I'm happy to put it into the B category, but it's not an A category book. Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. This has an epigraph from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and this is also a B category. I own it, and I plan on reading this next year, but I haven't read it yet. So Portrait of the Artist and Metamorphoses. One of my premonitions for this video was that there's 2 books that are going to show up a lot of the time, and it is going to be the Holy Bible and it is going to be the works of William Shakespeare. So starting off with the Handmaid's Tale, a little bit tongue-tied, but The Handmaid's Tale has 3 epigraphs. The first is from Genesis, which that's an A category. I have read it. And there's another one from Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. I feel like I've heard of Jonathan Swift, but I have not heard of that book, so I'm going to put that into the D tier. And lastly, this is a sort of NA category. There's a Sufi proverb in here, which I tried to hunt it down. I couldn't find where it comes from. Whenever I type it in, it just brings me to The Handmaid's Tale. So yeah, unfortunately I couldn't hunt that one down, but there's three epigraphs in there with a bit of a spread. I'm going to be leaning on the Bible a bit more because there are going to be some more coming up. Speaking of Toni Morrison's Beloved, this has got an epigraph from Romans 9:25, and so yes, I have read Romans, and that means that this is an A tier. And you know what, just because it's quite short, I'll read it. I will call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. Just trying to get a little bit in because I never ended up making a video for Beloved. So, yeah. Another book which I didn't expect to see as often, but it's kind of up there with being referenced as many times as the Bible and Shakespeare. In The Master and Margarita, we have a quote from Faust Part 1, I think. And so I own Faust, but I have not read it, so this is going to go into the B tier. Yeah, there are some other books that you will see that reference Faust, and so I'm going to put this down, but I'll be drawing back on it shortly. Slow Learner by Thomas Pynchon. I didn't think this had an epigraph, but I actually skimmed through and I found that one of the stories starts with a quote from Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. I don't have that. Oh yeah, so it's the story Entropy. I don't have that book. I've heard of it, so that's going to fall into the C category. But yeah, I just managed to find that there was a Pynchon epigraph. There was an epigraph in this Pynchon book, and I have read this. So that's another one for the C category. Pale Fire has an epigraph that I did not expect, actually, and let me find it. It's actually from James Boswell's The Life of Dr. Johnson, and I have heard of that book, don't own it or haven't read it, and so that's another C category, but I remember people thinking that this was quite a unique epigraph, especially because there's another Nabokov book coming up that has a very cool epigraph. But yeah, so that's another one for the C category. Butcher's Crossing by John Williams has got 2 epigraphs. The first is Nature by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which again I've heard of but I don't own, and the second is The Confidence Man by Herman Melville, which I have heard of and don't own. So that's 2 C tiers for a B+ tier book. Hot take, but yeah. Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. This has got a couple of epigraphs, and there's 2. There's The Magician's Nephew, which is by C.S. Lewis. I haven't heard of that book, but I've heard of C.S. Lewis, so I'm going to give that a D tier. And then maybe for spoiler reasons, I'm not going to tell you what the other epigraph is in this book, but it falls into the NA category. So yeah, it's a clever epigraph, and for anyone who's read the book, maybe go back and reread that epigraph if you want a little bit of a fun Easter egg. But yeah, so 1 D tier and 1 NA. It's not D tier, it's just a D category epigraph from Susanna Clarke. Saturn Tango, this was a little bit hard to hunt down because Crush and Hawkeye just gave the initials, but the epigraph is from Franz Kafka's The Castle, which I have heard of, I don't own. I thought I owned it, but I actually own the trial, so that one unfortunately goes into the C tier. I'm going to keep saying C tier, even though it's not right. I apologize for that. But it's not, obviously this isn't a qualitative mark on the epigraphs themselves. It's just a qualitative mark on my experience with the epigraphs. But I know you already know that. Sergio de la Parva's A Naked Singularity. Now, there is an epigraph at the start of every single chapter, but a lot of them are sort of joke epigraphs, or they were pretty much impossible to hunt down. And so I'm going to be honest, I'm not doing that. I loved this book, Sergio de la Parva, but I'm just going to use the epigraph that is at the very start of part 1, which is from Psalm 14:2-3. And yeah, I have read the Book of Psalms, so thank you, de la Parva, for giving me another epigraph in the A category, and for giving us a great book. William Gaddis's JR, this only has 1 epigraph. We are going to see more of William Gaddis later on, but this only has 1 epigraph, and it's kind of hidden in the dedication. At the start of the book is dedicated to his son Matthew, but underneath it says, once more unto the breach, dear friend, once more. And that, if I remember correctly, comes from Henry V. Let me look at my notes to just make sure. Yeah, Henry V, and I own the complete works of Shakespeare, but I haven't read Henry V, so that is going to go into the C tier. C tier. Next up, Reader's Block by David Markson, probably one of my favorite authors, and he has 2 epigraphs from this one. He has This the Way to the Musée Room, Mind Your Hat's Going In by Joyce, which is from Finnegan's Wake. I own but have not read Finnegan's Wake. I've read like random pages of it, but yeah, we're going to put that into the B category. And then there is another epigraph by Borges that says, first and foremost, I think of myself as a reader, and I really tried to hunt that down, but I don't know exactly where Borges said that. So if anybody knows, let me know. I've read like all of Borges's essays, and he probably said it in one of those essays, but I just can't remember where that exact one line comes from. If you Google it, it will come up with Borges and I, which is a poem. I have the short story Borges and I don't know if it's the same thing, but yeah, I'm just going to do a safety NA for that one. I'm not going to count that Borges epigraph, but yeah, let me know in the comments if you found it and you have a way of sort of rectifying the stats. But yeah, 1 for the B category. And then George Salas's Sea Above, Sun Below. This has 2 epigraphs, and one of them is from the book of Isaiah, which I have read. And at some point it's going to become tedious to just keep holding up the Bible over and over again, so I'm going to skip that. Just assume that I own the Bible and own the complete works of Shakespeare. But then there's another one. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a very old man with enormous wings, which of course suits this book very well. I've heard of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, so that's going into the C category, but I hadn't heard of the... Oh, sorry, no, that's going into the D category because I've heard of the author but not of the book. Alright, next up, we're going to have a brief interlude of books that have epigraphs that are all NA because they don't quite fall into a specific category of books. A lot of these are actually songs or something like that. But real quick, in William Gaddis's A Frolic of His Own, he has an epigraph that is Thoreau to Emerson. It's just kind of a quote, and what ended up being... It ended up being used by Emerson in his it ended up being used by Thoreau in his epigraph. What's the word? What's the phrase for? Not an epigraph. It's the epitaph, or like a funeral speech. I'm completely blanking on the name. So maybe we could hunt that down, but that's not a book or anything published, and so that's a kind of NA category. But it is a really great quote, and it suits this book very well. Next up, we've got Alice Walker's The Color Purple. This starts with Show Me How You Do It Like You Do, Show Me How You Do It by Stevie Wonder, which is from the song Do Like You. I'll triple check that. But not a book, so not falling into a particular category. Nabokov's Invitation to a Beheading. This has got a classic. This is sort of what I was expecting from a Nabokov epigraph, where he has something by Delalande's Discours sur les Ombres, and that is a made-up epigraph that author does not exist. It's Nabokov's invention, and so NA, but a very cool Nabokov trick that I'm sure there are other books of his that have pulled that, which I probably have just not read, so they haven't made it onto this list. But also NA. Thomas Pynchon's Vineland. This has the lyrics from Johnny Copeland's Every Dog Has His Day at the start, and I listened to it. It's a great song. Don't feel like the horn section is entirely in tune, but it is a great song, and definitely fits into this sort of 60s, 70s era. Or was Reagan's War on Drugs, which, for our American friends, let me know exactly when that was. But that's sort of when this is one of the California novels that Pynchon wrote, and it kind of deals with that era. Next up, we have Slaughterhouse-Five. This has a couple of lines from the start of a Christmas Carol, and I can't remember exactly what it's called. Let me just take a look at my notes. It's called Away in a Manger. It's a 19th century Christmas Carol. I was able to find it and hunt it down. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but the little Lord Jesus no crying he makes. That's the epigraph to Slaughterhouse-Five, and not quite a book. So yeah. We've got Otessa Moshfe's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. She has some lyrics from a Joni Mitchell song, which is The Wolf That Lives in Lindsay. And so, yeah, another song as an epigraph. And lucky last, I love this for 2 reasons. Firstly, The Great Gatsby. This has an epigraph by Thomas Park de Invilliers, which is an invention of Fitzgerald. I think he's a poet character from This Side of Paradise, but in any case, it's not a real book. But I also really love that the dedication to this says, once again to Zelda, and I love that so much because I don't know how Fitzgerald wanted that to come across. He was like, oh, once again, my dear, this is for you. But when I read that the first time, I just thought he was like sighing, like, oh, once again to Zelda. So it's a kind of funny one. Anyway, we're moving on into some books that have more, more than 2 or 3 epigraphs, and we're going to get to some really cool stuff here. So first and foremost, we've got White Teeth by Zadie Smith. She starts the book with a prologue from The Tempest. What's past is prologue, and so that falls into, again, the C category, own but I have not read. We've got, actually I'm going to get it up just because I might not be able to dig through. She's got an epigraph from Where Angels Fear to Tread by E.M. Forster. I own that book. I don't have it on me right now, but I've loaned it out to a friend, but I own that book, but I haven't read it, so that is falling into the B tier. She has an epigraph from Nabokov's Lolita, which this is A. I have read it. And she has, so, I'm gonna safety say C, but you know, maybe this falls into a B category. But she has the new shorter Oxford English Dictionary in there because she uses the definition of the word fundamentalism, and I have the Australian Concise 6th edition Oxford Dictionary. I don't know if you want to count that as me owning that book. Like, I don't have the exact book that she mentioned, but I do have an Oxford Dictionary. So yeah, I'm just gonna safety call that a C, but it doesn't yeah, like maybe that could be a B. And then she also has some lyrics for As Time Goes By Herman Hupfield. That's a song, so that's falling into the NA category. But yeah, Zadie Smith, great author. I own so many of her books, but I've only read White Teeth, which is really, really criminal. So I need to go through and read a lot more of her stuff. And I've got some of her essays as well. Okay, next up. This is one of the first people who I looked at, and it made me realize that this is going to be a long video. So thank you for sticking with me so far. But now we're getting into the works of Jorge Luis Borges, who has a habit of starting many of his stories with epigraphs. And so, starting off, the story The Immortal has an epigraph from Francis Bacon's Essays. I've heard of Francis Bacon's Essays, but I don't own it, so I'm not going to count that. That's going to go into the C category. Next up, we've got an epigraph at the start of a biography of Tadeo Isidoro Cruz, and he uses a fragment from Yeats's The Winding Stair, and I do have The Winding Stair, I believe, in this collection. I haven't read it, but I do own it, so because it's just the complete Yeats, and so yeah, I'm going to count that as a B category epigraph because I do own Yeats' collection, and I'm not going to chuck that book or yeet that book yet because there's another Yeats that's coming up. At the start of The House of Asterion, we have an epigraph from the book Library by Apollodorus. I'd never heard of that, so that is going into the E category. The start of Deutsches Requiem, we have a quote from Job. So I have read the book of Job, and that is going into the A category. We've got from Averroes's Search, we've got a quote from the book Averroes by Ernest Renan. I'd never heard of that, so that's going into E tier. Like, I think if I searched my memory, I could probably say that I remember Averroes, but I didn't know anything about that book. On Ibn Hakam, I'm going to butcher this so hard, I'm so sorry. Ibn Hakam al-Bukhari, Murdered in His Labyrinth, has a quote from the Quran, which I have somewhere here. I have here, and I have read the Quran, so that's going into the A category. At the start of the Aleph, we have 2 epigraphs. We have one from Hamlet, which I have read, so A category, and then we also have one from Hobbes's Leviathan, which I've heard of, but I have not read and do not own, so that's going into C category. Yeah, and that's all of the epigraphs from Borges's The Aleph and Other Stories. Next up, moving into fictions, we have a number of epigraphs. There's some that I really didn't expect, and is kind of a pleasure to see showing up in here. At the start of The Circular Ruins, we have an epigraph from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, which I do own, and so that is going into the B category. And while I'm here talking about The Circular Ruins, I'll take a quick moment to shout out another great YouTuber, Strange Lucidity, who made a really excellent video analysis on Borges's The Circular Ruins, and she talks about, you know, the concept of lucid dreaming and astral projection, and she's got an all-around really great channel, so I definitely recommend recommend, if you haven't already checked out Strange Lucidity, I'll put a link in the comments section. I really recommend it. She's got a great channel. From the Library of Babel, we have an epigraph from Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy. I'm going to have to move a couple of things around, but I do... Oh, we lost Charles Darwin just then. I'm so sorry. But I do own Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy. This is one of... I'll talk a little bit more about this in another video, but this is one of my 4 books that I want to read next year. So yeah, this is that epigraph is going to go into the B category. And give me a moment, I've just got to save Charles Darwin and bring him back up here. Okay, from Borges' story, The Theme of the Traitor and the Hero, we have another quote from W.B. Yeats. This is from his poem The Tower, which again, I have that collection, so I'm gonna... Oh my gosh, there's someone just... So we have The Tower, and again, I own that collection, so I'm going to put that into the B category. We have a story called The Secret Miracle, which once again uses a quote from the Quran, which was going to fall into the A category, but I'm just going to take another second to reiterate how much I love this particular story, and I think that if you want to just have your mind absolutely explode by reading Borges in just a couple of pages, I recommend The Secret Miracle from this collection. And lucky last, this is another one of those reasons why that kind of inspired me to do this video, which is making me want to go hunt down some of these books. From Borges's 3 versions of Judas, there is an epigraph from T.E. Lawrence's The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and so I have heard of that book because and this is going to be, oh man, for any cinephiles out there, I'm sorry, you're going to have to bear with some cringe, but I watched Lawrence of Arabia on a plane with a screen that was probably this big, and it was a wild experience, but talk about making a 4-hour plane ride feel like a 16-hour one. But I loved the movie, and I'm a fan of slow burn movies, but it was so funny, like just watching this incredible film on this absolutely miniature screen with these headphones that had the worst balance, so you just hear Lawrence talking with someone and they're just whispering, and then all of a sudden there's a shot of the desert and it's just it's like, oh my gosh, I was in sync with some fireworks going on outside. Anyway, moving on. So that's going to go into the C category. I've heard of that book. Next up, we've got another big amount of epigraphs, and I'm not going to be able to skip through. It's going to take a lot of time to kind of skip through, but I do have a list of all of the epigraphs from William Gaddis's The Recognitions. Now, keep in mind there's a lot of literary references in here, so he talks about Rilke and he talks about Pound and a lot of people, but I'm only going to use epigraphs or things that actually appear as epigraphs from the start of chapters and the like. The one that opens the book is from a Latin author, Irenaeus, and it's from Adversus Heresies, like Against Heresies, and it has a quote that is something, I've seen a lot of translations of it, but it's something like, there is nothing hollow without the sign of God in it, which I think is really great and sets up a lot of the themes of the book. And then of course we've got at the very start we've got a quote from Faust Part 2, and so, oh, by the way, with that Irenaeus one, I'd never heard of it, so that's going into the E tier. But with Faust Part 2, again, I own Faust, so that's going to go into the B tier. And I'm just reading from my notes. In the rest of the book, we've got quite a number of epigraphs. We've got a fragment from Rimbaud's A Season in Hell. I'd heard of Rimbaud, but not that poem, so that's going D tier. Society and Solitude, a fragment from an essay by Emerson. Again, I've heard of Emerson, but not that essay, so D tier. There is an extract from the Brothers Karamazov, which I do own and I have read, so that's going into the A tier. We've got an extract from Codicillus, translated by Raymond Lully, and I've never heard of that, so I can't even pronounce it, so that's going into the E tier. We've got an extract from Confessions of an English Opium Eater, which I have heard of but I don't own and haven't read, so C tier. We've got one that's Trucs and Truqueurs, or Truths and Fakes, or something like that, by Paul Udell, and that's also E tier. We've got The Spanish Tragedy by Thomas Kidd. I'd never heard of any of this, so that's also going into the E tier. A book on counterfeiting, Crimes Against Our People by Lawrence Dwight Smith, E tier. Don't know anything about that. On the Origin of Species, Survival of the Fittest. Darwin, survived falling onto the floor before, so we're going to give him a B category since I own it but have not read it. We've also got The Harrowing of Hell, and it's part of the Chester Mystery Plays, which I'd not heard of at all. So E tier. We've got The Golden Bow by Fraser, which I do own. This is another one of the 4 books that I want to read next year, so that's going into B. And we also have A Hindu Holiday, an Indian Journal by J.R. Ackerley, which is kind of funny because J.R. is going to be the name of Gaddis's next book, but I hadn't heard of that. And also Amer Sin Saber a Quien by Lope de Vega. I hadn't heard of that either, so 2 E tiers. We've got The Auguries of Experience. I own the complete William Blake, so I'm going to consider that a B tier. And also the final epigraph in the recognitions is from Two Kings, which I have read, so that's an A tier. Okay, and so we're pretty much at the end. I really don't think that there's any particular book that has a lot of epigraphs, or just kidding, I had to save the best for last. That was so lame. But anyway, this is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. The reason I had to save this for the very end is because not only does Moby Dick have more epigraphs than any book on this list, it has more pages of epigraphs than almost any book on this list. There's about 10 pages worth of epigraphs or extracts from Moby Dick, and so there's a lot of them. There's a lot of like Nantucket singing and whaling songs, and a lot of just fragments and like little scribbles from from whaling adventures and sea journals. But this is the list of the extracts that I was actually able to find and tie and attach to a book, and so I'm just going to quickly read these out. Moby Dick has extracts from the Book of Genesis, so that's A. The Book of Job, so that's A. The Book of Jonah, A. Book of Psalms, A. Book of Isaiah, A. Plutarch's Essays, D. Pliny, D. The True History by Lucia of Samosata, E. An Apology for Raymond Sebond, B. I'm guessing because I own the complete Montaigne. The Annals of England to 1603 by Stowe, E. A History of Life and Death by Bacon, D. King Henry by William Shakespeare, B. Hamlet, A. The Fairy Queen by Spencer, E. The Battle of Summer Islands by Walker, E. Leviathan by Hobbes, C. Holy War, Bunyan, E. Paradise Lost by Milton, A tier. Sorry, it's on the shelf. I forgot to get that out. The Holy State and the Profane State by Fuller, E. Annals Mirabilis by Dryden, D. Rape of the Lock by Pope, C. Natural Theology or Evidences and Attributes of the Deity by Paley, E. The World Before the Flood by Montgomery, E. The Triumph of the Whale by Lamb, E. A lot of E's. The History of Nantucket by Macy is E. Twice Told Tales by Hawthorne, D. Thank you, finally. The Pilot by Cooper, E. The Natural History of the Sperm Whale by Beale is E. Etchings of a Whaling Cruise by Brown is E. Voyage of a Naturalist by, or The Voyage of a Beagle by Darwin is D. Okay, so that is every book that I have that has an epigraph that I was able to hunt down in some way, shape, or form. Thank you for sticking through with this video and going through. I think that in terms of whether it was worth it, it was really cool to see how often Faust is mentioned. I didn't realize that it would be really up there, kind of mentioned 4 or 5 times across a pretty decent spectrum of books. But it's also definitely told me that I need to go and read The Metamorphoses by Ovid, and also just go through and read, you know, Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy, and really read more Shakespeare. I've read so little Shakespeare. I've just read some of the sonnet. I've read all of his sonnets, and I've read Hamlet and Othello. So yeah, I have a lot of Shakespeare to catch up on, but those are all of my books that have epigraphs. Let me know if there's any unique epigraphs that you've come across where you didn't expect to find it in the context of this book, or if there are any books from this list, any epigraphs from this list that, you know, maybe were an E tier to me, but were a D tier or even higher for you, that you recommend I check out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.